Today, our guest is Heather Estes from The Worthy Ranch. We will be talking with Heather about the Worthiness Formula, the Worthy Ranch, and an exciting pilot program in collaboration with other organizations serving survivors of human trafficking. Join us today with Heather Estes. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Heather Estes. We are so excited for you to be here with us today.
I'm excited to be here with my friend and share all these awesome things that we're doing together. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, Heather, we're so glad that you are here. So share with our listeners about the Worthiness Formula and its proven impact on helping survivors of human trafficking.
Yeah, so the Worthiness Formula was a program that I developed out of necessity for myself. I was going through a very challenging time in my life and realized that at the core of that challenge was my self-worth. Self-worth and me were the common denominator. And I realized that I didn't understand what it meant to be worthy. And I didn't know where that came from. Like, how do I get back to believing that about myself? I was a journalist by nature. And so finding out the story, the truth, all of that, I went back to those journalistic roots and I was like, well, since I don't know this, I need to do my homework and figure out what it means to be worthy. Because let's just start there, right? The awareness is the first step of anything.
Yeah.
And I also knew that even though on the outside, my life seemed normal and successful, there was a lot of challenges still popping up. So still suffering from the PTSD of my own trauma as a child and not really recovering from that, but kind of just compartmentalizing it. As a child, I was sexually molested for many years, from the ages of 4 to 9, by a family member. And, you know, in our culture, we don't talk about those things. We just put them away and we pretend they didn't happen. And that's exactly what I did. So there's different ways you can deal with trauma. And the way that I did it is I was a high achiever. I needed to earn my worth and prove that I was worthy. And so even though I didn't realize that's what it's doing, I excelled in school and sports and everything. I did whatever I could do to create affirmation that I was deserving and valued. And so fast forward, even though that was the outside of my life, there was still these trickling things that came through. And it was the areas of relationships and having a healthy relationship. It was the area of finances, right? Making great money, but still living paycheck to paycheck. It was the area of my body image. I had struggled since I was a child, on and off with my weight. I need to understand how the trauma was living in my body. And then at this point in my life, the come to Jesus point, I call it, was when I didn't even feel worthy now of being a mom. And I had 5 kids. I went through a really ugly divorce and custody battle. And when I was not named the primary custody parent in that custody battle, I basically was ready to give up. I was done. You know, I wasn't worthy of a healthy relationship, obviously, because I married a narcissist. I wasn't, deserving of a healthy body. I wasn't deserved of financial freedom. And now I wasn't even deserving being a mom. And so there was a point, and the only point in my life where I thought, you know what, I'm not needed anymore, and decided that my kids were taken care of, obviously, and I wasn't needed. And it was at that point I decided for just a millisecond that I was going to take my own life. And then, I was like, that's, my spirituality. God steps in and says, nope, we're not done with you yet. And so, okay, I said, okay, well, I don't know what it means to be worthy. So help me figure that out. Right. And I remember we all have those moments when the universe, God, Great Spirit, our ancestors, however you relate, speak to us. And I was like, so what does it mean to be worthy? And it was my voice literally said, Google it. And so I picked up my phone and I literally Googled what it meant to be worthy. And I was like, okay, means good enough. And I was like, that's very simple, but I don't know about that. And I Googled it again, a different dictionary, until I was like, okay, I get it. So then it was more about, okay, where does that come from? Right. And how do I get back to believing myself? And so going back to my journalistic nature, I started thinking about who in my life did I observe that to me seemed that they lived a valued and worthy life. And I started interviewing those people. And it was because I was in philanthropy and living in Las Vegas, I had access to, I mean, the cream of the crop, right? The billionaires, the CEOs, all of these people that were philanthropists. And at that time, for me, looking at their lives, I'm like, wow, they got it all together. And so I started doing interviews. And through that process, I learned a couple of things. I learned about, even though they may look like they have everything together on the outside, everybody is challenged with self-worth at some point in their life. And so that was a story that they would share with me. One of the first women that I met, her name was Jenna. I looked at her life and she did have a great, amazing life. And when I asked her, there's two questions I asked people. What do you think it means to be worthy? And where does that come from? Where do you think that comes from? And have you ever felt unworthy? Those were like the questions I asked them for the interview. And for her, I remember her saying, well, it's innate. When I asked her what it means to be worthy and where it comes from, she's like, it's innate. It's already in us, right? And I said, well, because I didn't know the definition at the time of what innate was. And I didn't want to look stupid in front of my friend. And I said, well, can you dive into that a little bit deeper and share with me what that means? And she said, well, it comes from within. And that was the moment that I realized there's this huge difference between what we call self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-worth. The life that I was building on the outside, or self-confidence or self-esteem. And those words get interchanged with self-worth when they're very different. But I realized what she was saying is that what is built on the outside is the car, the career, the degree, the promotion, the job, all of the things that we do to get more self-esteem, more confidence is built on the outside, versus what we are and our being is 100% worthy of everything this world has to offer. And so as we go through life, you and me, Penny, aren't sitting, comparing diaper brands when we're not even a year old, saying, I got Pampers and she's got Huggies. No, we know who we are. We ask for what we want, and we are 100% ourselves. We haven't got to the point where others have influenced us, but that's what happens, right? The things come into our life, influences, experiences, trauma, abuse. Not all is bad. Many are good, but they look like parents. They look like religion. They look like culture. They look like trauma. All of these things happen to us, and it changes our belief. Where once we were 100% worthy and we believed we were, as these things happen to us, it changes our belief in self. And so I quickly understood that. And so then I was like, how do I get back to that? Right. And it's almost an unlearning, right, to get back to that. And so I realized that even though I was worthy, I had to work on the belief system for myself and change that. And that's the second part. So the first part of the worthiness formula is awareness, understanding what it means to be worthy, where it comes from. The second part is the belief, believing that again. And so I started working on, what did I believe? And more importantly, how did I make the best decisions for myself? I realized that people had these personality core values, and we all have them, and it's how we make decisions in life. It's what makes us different from each other, what is important to us. And I realized that, wow, we all have these, and when we're using them, our core values, and we're listening to ourselves, right, our intuition, Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, the inner voice, when those two things collide and are aligned with each other, we always make the best decision for ourselves. But when they don't, and when we don't do that, we make the worst decision for ourselves. And what's interesting is that when we are in alignment with that voice and making decisions based on who we are, not what other people think, not what culture says, not what society says, but based on who we are, we always make the best decision for ourselves, and everyone around us. And then when we don't do that, it's not the best decision for us, and it's not the best decision for anyone around us. I like to use the example of, a survivor of domestic violence, because how many times have you seen the woman or the survivor of human trafficking that consistently goes back to their trafficker or their abuser, and they're making decisions based on the trauma and what has happened to them, not who they are, because we know if they did, they would end that relationship, right? They would separate themselves that relationship. And when they do that, that's the best decision for themselves. And even though the abuser or the trafficker, they're not going to think it's the best decision, but ultimately it is the best decision for themselves, even if they never come to that conclusion. And so it's with all the lives. But I realized once I started making decisions based on who I was and listening to myself, I started to believe in myself, and I started to see the manifestation of my life happening and stepping into my purpose. And I was like, wow, this is something, right? And the more I made decisions, and my core values are faith, fun, and creativity. That's how I make decisions, and I have my entire life. If I look back at every decision I've made that was the best decision for me, it involved those core values. And I say, people often think, well, faith. And when I describe faith, I mean the true definition of faith, to believe in what is not seen. And so, yes, I'm a very spiritual person. I was raised in church, baptized Christian, and now I continue to evolve in my own way in spirituality. But what I say is I have faith. And this is where my own purpose comes into play with the Worthiness Formula and sharing this with people. What happens, Penny, when we have too much faith in something or someone? Or what if we don't have enough faith? I can see the potential in people before they see it in themselves, right? But they have to see that. Or we get disappointed when we set these expectations, because we know, like as a mom, we know our kids have the potential and the gifts and the talents to accomplish the things that they put before them, but they may not know that yet, right? So it's a balance of those core values. When a strength is overused, it becomes a weakness. And so faith, then creativity. If my job, if my friends, if anything I do does not involve some form of creativity, I ain't doing it. It's not happening. And the same with fun, which took me literally in my own personal journey of learning my core values, 8 weeks to accept that fun was a core value for me. Because Penny, what do we think of people that have too much fun? They're irresponsible, they get in trouble, and that's exactly what happens when you do too much fun. Again, it's a balance of fun. But what happens when people don't have any fun at all, right? So learning to balance those core values is our journey in life, but always going back to them to make decisions. And regardless of the influences of the world, because I'm not saying you don't listen to advice but what I'm saying is when you're in doubt and you're on the fence, you have these tools. You know yourself, and you say, okay, does it include these 3 core values? And what does my gut say, right? What does my intuition say about this? And I have never made a bad decision using this process. So you can understand the power of using this process to help survivors of human trafficking. Any survivor, any victim of these. I mean, in kids, if they knew this as a child, how that could change the world, literally. I talk about a study that was done with kids that are in the 3rd grade, right? And when we're in the 3rd grade, we want to be the president, we want to be the pilot, no matter what our gender, race, ethnicity, demographic, income, our parents' income, it doesn't matter, right? We have this complete belief in self, and we really want to be what we want to be. We know ourselves then. And it isn't until all of that stuff happens that changes our belief about this. So these 3rd graders believed highly in their self-worth. And so they are graded at 85%, right? The same group of kids in the middle school, right, are graded, and their self-worth starts to what? Do you think it increases or decreases?
Oh, decreases.
Yes. And so now they're at 65%. That's where their self-worth is graded, right? Because I mean, they're middle school. They have all the peer pressures and they're developing and they have all the things that are happening in middle school. Then we get to high school. Penny, guess what their grade on self-worth was in high school? What percentage they were at?
Are we talking about all genders?
Yep.
For me, it would have been tanking, but
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for others, maybe it's increasing. But for me, it would have been tanking.
Yeah. So that same group of kids, that 5%.
Yeah.
So that's where they were in high school. And what I say is, if we're at 5% in high school, where are we at now?
Right. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And so the reason I use that is because if kids don't value themselves,
Mm-hmm.
they certainly aren't going to value others in the lives of others. And this is what happens when we have mass shooting and kids going out doing these horrible acts of violence
Mm-hmm.
against other people's and then taking their own life, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens when people do not value their own life or the life of others. And so making those decisions, understanding your value and knowing you are is critical to this journey of life. And so that for me was life changing. And then the last part of, we don't do life alone, right? So the last part of the formula is C, which is community. So then it's understanding the old saying, who are the 5 people you surround yourself with, right? Because you are those 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at that, how do we have healthy boundaries in our lives? And maybe there's relationships that we have to let go of. Maybe there's relationships that we need to add. Maybe we need a mentor or a coach or a spiritual guide or just a good neighbor. But maybe we don't need this narcissistic, abusive relationship, whether it is a spouse, whether it is a child, whether it is a parent. You got to make those decisions. And it's tough for people because sometimes they have to let go, or if they can't create a healthy boundary with that person, then they have to let them go. And so it's simple. The formula is simple, but it's not easy sometimes. In community, it's also about how do we, now that we understand our value, how do we share that with others? How do we see the value in other people? How do we now reciprocate and believe, yes, I deserve everything this world has to offer, but so does he, and so does she, and so do they, regardless of what they have done. This is tough too for people to accept. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what you're going to do. You are always worthy. And I'm not advocating for, people that have done horrible things and saying, how can they be just as worthy as me? Well, they are. And they obviously don't have that value system. Again, going back to, understanding how we become who we are and some of the unlearnings we have to do and applying and making decisions, confident decisions is so important. We all know the woman or the man that walks in a room and they know exactly what they want. They say yes or no. They at the drop of a hat like that, right? And there's something to that because they know themselves. They know what they like. They know what they don't like. They know who they are. So how important would this be for survivors of human trafficking to have this tool to be able to start to base their decisions on who they are, not what has happened to them? And so those 3 elements, like me, not maybe they don't even understand what it means to be worthy, right? They never, just like I didn't, and where that comes from. Maybe they think it is something I have to do, right, to gain the affirmation and the value of others. No. How do we help them rediscover their core values and who they are?
Mm-hmm.
How do we help them, discover those 3 to 5 values that are who they are and make them different from everybody else, right? Because Penny, what pisses you off and what pisses me off are totally 2 different things,
Mm-hmm.
right? What makes you happy and what you admire and what I admire, yes, they may be same, but must they be different? But as we start to, and that's these exercises we go through with the survivors so they can start to recognize the commonalities of these things that become and that are who they are, their core values.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of those things, every one of us, every single human being that I know struggles with trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
And I think it was during the 80s or maybe even the 70s, but it definitely was during my young adult years when that really became buzzwords, finding out who you are, figuring out who you are. And every person I know, whether they've been a victim of horrible sexual violence or some other type of a crime, or in struggling relationships or financially struggling, whatever it might be, maybe they've grown up in poverty, maybe they grew up in extreme wealth. Every single person I know has had challenges in figuring out who they are. And I think so much of what you're saying is when we discover what our core values are and go through those processes where we are willing to dive into learning who we are, because that is not easy. And I love that you made the distinction between simple and easy, very different things. Also, when we discover what our core values are, we also discover who it is we are attracted to, who it is we want to follow, who it is we align our belief systems with, who it is we may
who are our people.
Yeah, who are our people, but also how vulnerable we are, to succumbing to weird belief systems out there. Do we succumb to cult type behavior?
Yeah.
All of those types of things is really important for all the things that you're talking about, whether it's a survivor of human trafficking or just simply another person out there. And I love that you distinguish that success is not based upon monetary value.
No.
That's not success at all. It's not life success. But oftentimes society makes it seem as though people who have a ton of money have their shit together, when you and I both know, no, they don't. No,
Yeah.
they really don't.
No, they don't.
And
Right.
They may have figured out how to work different business angles. They may have inherited money. They may have figured out, they may be very good at business in some way, shape, or form, but it certainly doesn't mean they have their life shit together, or that they are a valuable human being to others in helping people find their self-worth. But I love that you distinguish those and help other people to distinguish those, because it's very true. Been through that in my own life as well. But this leads us, and you have shared some very key tools, and this leads us to a big and beautiful dream of yours called the Worthy Ranch. So tell us how you decided on Montana for this big, beautiful dream of yours, and what stage you're at with this wonderful project, and tell us more about the Worthy Ranch.
Yeah. So I started testing out the worthiness formula, right? And I was like, this is working for me. Is it, it may not be for everybody, but maybe it is for people that are challenged and maybe have some issues with their own self-worth. And so I started coaching women and piloting the original program. And one of the women that I worked with, because like I said, the philanthropy side, someone that was a philanthropist with the organization I worked for, we were talking about the Worthiness Formula, and I was talking just like I'm sharing with you. And he said, you need to come teach this to because he was a high end realtor brokerage in Las Vegas. And he's like, please come share this with my realtors. I think it would help them. And yes, of course it would, right? Anybody that would benefit from this. And so I went and shared it with the realtors, and his marketing guy was kind of listening in and, poking his head. And even though he wasn't there the whole time. And afterwards he came up to me and he said, he's like, I have to ask you, would it be appropriate if I wanted to hire you for my girlfriend? And I said, well, tell me more about that. What does that mean, right? What are you talking about? And so he, said, I believe in her. She has so much potential. I just think she has some challenges on her own self-belief system. And I think you could really help her. And I said, absolutely. And and thank you for wanting to support her in this way. And so I ended up working with her, and she went on. She was a boxer. Her family was known for boxing. Her dad was a good, famous, infamous boxer. Her brothers were both boxers. And she wanted to create a women's boxing gym in Las Vegas because that was her passion. And it was also her way of healing too, right? So I went on to help her do that and help her set. So one of the things in the Worthiness Formula that we do is, once we understand these, before we even get into the worthiness formula, we do what I call the worthy life roadmap, and I ask them to, what does your life look like? If it was magic, you could have anything. And what that exercise boils down to is laying out their dream life, and then we pick one goal from that life. And the idea is that we now have this goal, and things need to happen. We have to make decisions around that. So now we start to apply. So we implement the worthiness formula and making decisions towards that goal. And so that's what we do with the Worthiness Formula program. And so we did this and shared this with her. Well, Penny, guess where? I afterwards she was like, "This has helped me, and I am so grateful, and I want to help you. And how can I help you?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know, and I'll share with you my vision." And I came to know my innate cowgirl through this process, and I said, I love Las Vegas, but I don't want to be in the desert, and I would love to go someplace. And she said, "Well, guess where she was from, Penny?"
Is she from Montana? Is she from here? Where's she from?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Susan was from Billings, Montana.
Oh, yeah.
And she said to me, "Have you ever thought about," because I said, "I would love to," because I knew in this process for me, it was also, I bought my first horse. And that was the biggest challenge. I had never had a horse. And so learning, and then I took care of 7 horses. So that was a whole healing process. Even though I didn't know, and officially, we would call it equine therapy, it was equine therapy. And I knew that was a part of my healing. And so I wanted to combine these things. I knew about the importance of education and my gifts and my talents and applying those to a job and a career. I'd never worked a job that I didn't like. Again, I had already been using my core values. Every job was included them. And so I wanted to put these 3 elements together, right? The equine therapy, the self-worth life coaching, and the career development to help women, to help survivors of human trafficking and abuse. And so I shared this with her, and I said, "I want to build this ranch, and I want women to come there." And I really wanted to focus on women. It was the aftercare, because I knew that there were survivors like me who had went off and achieved great things, but they were still struggling and they were still having challenges. And this unworthiness was still showing up in their life. And she said, "Well, have you thought about Montana?" And I said, "I have actually, but tell me more." And she said, "Well, you got to meet my mom. Her mom is a real estate agent in Billings, Montana, and she started sending me property 7 years ago." And so, of course, yes, I'm kicking my butt because I didn't buy the property 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, life happens, and there were still things that needed to happen. And so I progressed. I started coaching. We piloted the Worthiness Formula with survivors during COVID in a virtual training where we made sure that our material was trauma informed, that it didn't trigger the survivors that I was working with, that the language was safe, all of those things. We did that during COVID. And of course, one of the best places to visit during COVID was Montana. And so we started coming here and checking out property. And eventually we knew it was a time to make the move. And we landed in Montana about 2 years, a little over 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now.
Mm-hmm. So who comes once you build this ranch and once this dream is manifested into reality and fruition happens with your dreams, who comes to the ranch and how are they served at the ranch? Do they live there for a period of time? Who qualifies? How many people will be there at that time being served? Tell us a little bit about that.
So what we did, again, going back to journalist nature, I was like, I got to do my homework. And so during that time, I visited safe houses. I visited other ranches. I went out to Texas, Utah, and visited these other ranches that were caring for survivors. And some safe houses as well. And what we discovered after interviewing the staff and the people and the survivors was there was this need, one, for a respite for the staff of these safe houses where they were working with survivors for 18 months up to 3 years on programs, right out of recovery, through addiction, all of the things. So they needed a little bit of respite for themselves. And of course, the survivors probably needed a break or needed something too, but to still receive programming. And so we decided to build our program in a way that would be either for the survivor that's transitioning out of a safe house. Maybe they're further along in their journey, they're not in addiction, but they're almost ready to kind of go out on their own. right? Ready to live what we would call a normal life. And so we offer our program a 90 days in the summer in Montana, which is the best time to be here. Right. So they would come, they still at their safe house or their transitional program, but they would come to us for 3 months in the summer before they're ready to move on. Go back to the transitional programming for the last year, but it would also offer that safe house, a respite for them to do their own program and professional development, but also they feel comfortable that their survivor was still and that their client was still going through programming and getting the care that they needed. And so they will come to us in 90 days, but it's not just for that client of a transitional program or safe house program. It is also for the survivor that looks like you and me, Penny, that is out there doing her best, trying to live her best life, but is still challenged. And if she is able to come to the ranch for the 90-day program, then we would accept her as well. So that's how the program works. So 90 days, they'll go through the self-worth life coaching program. They'll experience equine therapy. They will stay at the ranch property and also do career development. So the career development part is they receive a complete assessment where we identify their personality, right? Their gifts and abilities, their interest, right? And then, of course, their values. So it aligns with the self-worth life coaching core values part. And it pushes out this 28-page report. And our career direct consultant goes through that with them and helps them to identify what a job or a career might look like for them with all of this stuff. So they're not looking at going just to be a waitress at the restaurant, or, you know what I'm saying? It's really aligning them with what is possible. And so we start to look at, wow, you have an interest in animals and you have an interest in medical. Maybe, just maybe, you could be a veterinarian assistant, or maybe go to school for veterinarian work. And guess what? You can start right now at this ranch getting work experience to see if it's something you enjoy. So making sure that once we have this assessment, how do we plug them in either at the ranch so they get hands-on experience doing a job or career, or within safe partners in Billings in Montana, we would place them in like an internship program so they can actually work and see if it's something they like to do. So our goal is that when they leave that 90-day program, they have a resume, they have hands-on job experience, and they have references. And so that is the other part of that program, the 90-day program. The other part is we know that when survivors gather together, they heal. And so at the end of that 90 days, we have a program that will overlap that couple of days with the 90-day program, which is our alumni retreat. And so any survivor that has been through the Worthiness program, whether they have been at the ranch or through one-on-one coaching, will be able to attend that alumni retreat. And we will have the women from the alumni retreat speak into the women that have just completed the 90-day program, offering them hope and inspiration and showing them what's possible. And so that retreat will be a week long after the 90-day program. And again, and so that will be something they can always come back to. So even though they've gone through the 90 program, maybe they need a refresh, and they can always come through it again too. If they go through the first time and they think they need to come back, we are open to that. And so right now in Montana, we just launched our pilot program to work with survivors live. And the important part of that is to establish our collaborative partners. I think I'm skipping ahead on your question.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you just said. One is it's so important for people to understand that when you are a victim of sexual violence or a violent crime in some way, shape, or form, and there's trauma that is in your body, because that's where that trauma lives.
Yeah.
That's where the trauma was done. That's where that trauma lives. Is that trauma can be dealt with. You can work on that trauma throughout your life, but that's a lifelong process.
Healing process, yes.
It is. That's lifelong, especially for survivors of human trafficking. And oftentimes I've seen programs where they go through and then they're expected to be healed and better and move on with their life. And it doesn't work that way. You know, I watched that trauma within my mom, that she dealt with that throughout her life, and her body dealt with that throughout her body's life. And it is something that needs to be available, those times of rejuvenation, those times of breathing and being in that safe place to breathe and filling that body up again and having that place of restoration. That needs to be lifelong.
Yes.
And those survivors need to have that safe place to go to throughout their lives.
Yeah, it is a lifelong journey.
And so I'm thrilled about hearing that you can come back. You know that they're not sent out and now you're healed and now you've got all these tools and now go be successful. It's understanding, no, you come back, you get restoration, you get rejuvenation. You have to rebuild all of those resources within you.
Yeah.
And have those nourished.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was going to share is I love this idea and know that you've got a heart that is for many that are wounded. And we oftentimes look at the wounds of those that have experienced the sexual violence unto themselves. You know, it's happened within their bodies. But there are secondary survivors, whether that be family, but also one of the places and people, I guess I should say, not necessarily places, but people that I see are rarely ever provided services of respite, services of you have had a job of trauma shit. You've been dealing with really crappy things. And it's law enforcement that are in ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, law enforcement that are doing undercover type work with horrible, horrible things that are happening to children. It's those individuals who dedicate their lives to helping others that are in a constant expectation of, well, you're okay. You can just go home and you're fine. No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
Right. No.
The level of really horrible, horrible things they're dealing with on a continuous basis, whether it's victim specialists with the FBI or the United States Attorney's Office, or victim specialists working with municipal domestic violence survivors. Maybe they're at the state level, law enforcement at the state level, all different types of service providers out there, public servants out there dealing with this crap on a daily basis, the stuff they witness and see. You were at our recent general session for our task force when FBI victim specialists stood up and said, we can't unsee what we see.
Mm-hmm.
We can't unsee this. This is horrendous, what they deal with on a daily basis. And here she was at our general session reporting.
And it traumatizes them too.
Yeah. And she had been up all night long. She had not been to sleep. She had been at the hospital with a victim, a human trafficking victim, all night long. She comes to the general session. She's tired and she's got to go back to work. It's those folks that also need places of restoration.
100%.
Places of healing, places of breathing, places of saying, I need to just feel whole again and being able to get that shit out of their system for a while and have their faith in humanity restored.
I get that.
So, just putting that out there for you.
Yeah, I love
and
it.
If there's something we can collaborate on with other folks,
let's do it.
That's something that I think needs to happen as well.
Yep.
Because you and I both work with extraordinarily good people that also need care.
I don't think people do understand. I told my board this. We're going to have a training, Jenna, our survivor advisor, she's a survivor on survivor advisory board. And I said, you're going to hear things and you're going to need time to process. And you may not probably be able to process it tonight, but you're going to need to process that. So make sure that you allow yourself some time and space, ask the questions. We're here for you. I think that's being trauma informed, right? Understanding that when people are exposed, especially to something like hearing the story of a survivor or hearing just, even going to the Yellowstone Human Trafficking Task Force meeting, like I told them the same thing. When you go there, you're going to see things and hear things that you've never heard before that is happening right here, right in your hometown. And if you have questions, we're here to support you for that. Because when I worked, the reason I understood what human trafficking was before, like you said, this was 15 years ago, nobody knew what it was. I worked in a domestic violence shelter for women and children in Las Vegas. And that's where I saw it. And that's where I connected with the women. And that's where I saw, even though I'm on this side of things, we are doing the same thing. We are making the same, like we are struggling with the same challenge of self-worth, right? And making decisions for ourselves. But being in that environment every single day, Penny, it hardened me. I had to leave because it was starting to affect my loss in empathy, in, like you said, humanity, the way I was with my family, the way I was starting to treat people. I mean, it does have a toll on you. And so I had to step back and I said, I can still help this group in this way, so it is so important that we allow the people that are caring for and helping survivors and people with trauma abuse, just like compassion care for people that take care of veterans, that are married to veterans. It's the same. There's a lot of similarities in the PTSD that veterans and survivors have.
Yes.
So yes, and I'm glad people are opening their eyes and ears to that and wanting to help and provide compassionate care to people that are caring for them. It is definitely needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Heather. And you mentioned Jenna, and so we'll share, because Jenna McKay is a survivor that we interviewed on this podcast, and we met Jenna through a Worthy retreat, a Worthy Women's retreat. And so want to give a big shout out to the amazing Jenna McKay and all that she's doing in her life in California. And she's doing it at a national level and just accomplishing so much. She really is, and such an extraordinary voice out there. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on also, I shared this with people that it took me actually working in prison ministry in Oklahoma to understand that there are people that need to be in prison. That's where they need to be. These are folks that are going to do violent things to people. For some folks, prison is the right place for them to be, but that doesn't mean that they're in a wrong place, that prison can start even before those doors close, and freedom can happen even before those doors open again. But there are those individuals that need to be in prison because outside they will harm again. They will commit acts of violence again. Plus the fact our legal system is meant to be a place where we are to be protecting vulnerable populations. We are to be protecting individuals who have a right to live their life free from violence. And if individuals cannot not kill someone, cannot not harm someone, then they need to be in prison. And we have a lot of work to do in that system, an enormous amount of work to do within that system. But justice comes for those that have been violently harmed in their lives. They're offenders. The justice for them, their offenders, need to have full consequences. And that doesn't mean that they're still not entitled to some type of worthiness in their life. And I mean, you've known me well enough for you to know that my answer to that is yes, and they can find that in prison.
Yeah, and many of them do. It doesn't mean they have to be treated poorly.
Yes, I agree.
They have options, and I think that could be the best education and environment they ever receive.
Right.
And everybody has their own journey. And unfortunately, that's the journey for some. And it also, like you said, it's how do we best protect those that are vulnerable, and how do we, even though they are in prison, how do you help them in their next step, right?
Yes.
Because there are programs for that. I remember, I think I might have mentioned this, but one of my favorite groups of people to talk to were people that were coming out of incarceration and If I was a part of the group, the program that they had to go through before they would, they're off parole or whatever it was. But I will tell you, that audience looked like me and you. They were every demographic. They were blue collar, white collar, high income, low income, but they were the most receptive audience I've ever had. They heard things that nobody had ever said to them. Nobody had ever told them they were valued. They heard things that they had a purpose in life. So, it is for everyone, wherever you are.
Right. And for those that are coming out of prison, we want them to be the healthiest they can be so they do not commit acts of violence again.
Yes.
We want that. We do want that. No, I agree with you. It was surely one of the best things I've done in my life also was 3 years in, full-time Christian ministry. And part of that was in prison ministry all over the state of Oklahoma. Woo, that's a whole other subject. But one of the things that you and I love so much about the work that we both do is collaboration.
Yes.
And I think it's the only way we effectively fight crimes like human trafficking is that we have got to collaborate with others. This is such a deep-seated type of a crime that it takes all different types of agencies, organizations, programs, just society in general working together to combat this crime. So collaboration, we know, is critical in combating human trafficking and effectively serving survivors. Who are the organizations you're working with? What is your support system? What's that look like? And what long-term partnerships do you see as fundamental in the success of the Worthy Ranch? And how can folks best help this project? And I know I gave you a lot in there, so just share away.
Well, I think, living the Worthiness Formula is the best way that I could teach it, right? Is be an example. And so in that community part, the last part of that formula, making sure that I surround myself, that the Worthy Ranch surrounds itself with strong organizations. And so for us, we are not going out looking. Our goal is to get referrals from organizations to bring us, clients, survivors to participate in our programs. But we want them to be, secure, safe, legitimate, trauma informed, doing good work, all of the things, right? I think making sure that we are partnering and collaborating with the right organizations. And so that's part of that pilot program is to start working with organizations that currently work with survivors and that will refer them to us in the future. And those organizations locally look like, Yellowstone Human Trafficking Task Force is one of the organizations that we collaborate with. Native American Development Corporation, American Indian Consulting Services. It is very important for me and my values that we always reserve space for Indigenous and minority populations at the Worthy Ranch. And so making sure we are understanding, even though I'm Native American and Mexican, there's different cultures of different tribes. And how do we respect that? And how do we educate ourselves? How do we work with the local organizations that are serving the local tribes? And so making sure that we have representation on our board, on our staff that looks like them is important for us. And so partnering with organizations like those, YWCA, the Hannah House, is another partner. Department of Health and Human Services, right? Montana, we, just like you, we get calls already from FBI agents that are in the field, that are survivor advocates, that are working with survivors right now. So maintaining relationships with them as well. One of the other ones is YWCA. So they are serving women and their families that have suffered all types of abuse and trauma, including human trafficking. So I would say locally, those are the organizations that we collaborate with. Outside that, on a national level, Safe House Project is probably our go-to. They will be our mentor in the process of building the Worthy Ranch. So we become an accredited program and that other organizations feel comfortable because we will also take clients from all over the country. So we reserve spots for our local survivors, but we will be open to working with organizations that are across the country, especially in the states that we're familiar with: California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, where we have a presence. As you know, as we are discovering, the need is huge. And unfortunately, we know the work is deep. And because of the work that we're doing, we only will work with 6 to 10 survivors a year in that 90-day program. Because it is, like I said, it takes a long time and a lot of one-on-one and a tribe of village of healers, therapists, supporters to come around each survivor. And so how do we then how do we collaborate outside of that? How do we start to offer the worthiness formula to other organizations? And so we are in the process over this next year of taking our curriculum and creating a worthy university. And that program will be kind of like the worthiness formula in a box. It will have a facilitator training guide. It will have workshops, the videos, everything an organization would need to implement the worthiness formula right where they're at. And so that's how we are going to start to help and collaborate with organizations. So if they can't come to the Worthy Ranch, they can start now implementing these learnings, these teachings, these processes within their organization. And then following that in the future, we will start to build a curriculum for those kids that we talked about earlier, right? For elementary, middle school, and high school students, we will create a Worthy University. So that program can go into the schools as part of their correct character development program. It can go into after school programs. It can go into the Boys and Girls Club programs, programs that are working with youth. So we have a lot of things in our current happenings, but all in good time, right? And I think that we have done our research and continue to do our research and our homework and making sure we're not in any hurry, right? We're on what I call Montana time.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
just making sure that we continue to move forward slow and steady.
Yeah.
And really learning along that way. We get that the need is great and we don't want to turn people away, but we know that the right people will come to the Worthy Ranch when it's their time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard sometimes for people to understand too that we, in this type of work, so much of what we do is educating society, is working to change societal norms and belief systems.
Yes.
Because how nice would it be to be able to go from human trafficking 101 to like human trafficking graduate level in just the blink of an eye? It doesn't work that way.
Nope.
It's really having to change oppressive systems that have been belief systems for generations upon generations to help people to understand how we effectively address this need.
It takes everybody too. We all have different parts in that. I think that's what people maybe is also learning is that, we are very specific in the care that we offer. It's an after-care program for survivors.
Right.
But there are recovery homes, there are safe houses, there are so many different programs, but we need them all. And we all play a different part.
We need them all. That's exactly right. And you mentioned YWCA, and we are big supporters and proponents and cheerleaders for YWCAs all over the country. These are organizations, no matter where you are in the country, if you are in a challenging situation that is happening in your life, whether it's through domestic violence or human trafficking or some other type of sexual violence, get to a YWCA.
Yes.
They will help you with immediate case management and resources. And these are levels that we need. So we need more funds. We need the states, all of our states and our federal government to appropriate more funds there. We need funding for all of the different levels of long-term care services for these types of crimes and these types of victims that have been through this type of trauma. But the care you're talking about is so needed as well. And I love that you are working in this area because of all the survivors that we work with, and some of the hardest thing is to tell a survivor they're not ready to tell their story, because many survivors want to tell their story right away. And we have to sit with them and say, we don't think you're ready, and here's why we don't think you're ready, and here's what we think will happen, that you need other types of services first. And we will be here when you really are ready and in a place of solid ground to tell your story. It's places like the Worthy Ranch that will be there for those survivors when they are ready, because it's when they receive your types of services and they've gone through all those other programs first, that they are going to have the biggest impact in effectively combating human trafficking. And it's that survivor voice that is critical in leading the anti-trafficking movement. But they have to have all of those services first. They really do. And it's for their benefit as well as the benefit of all others that they're going to be out there helping. So we will obviously be giving people your website, but what is the greatest need you have right now, Heather? Do you need donations? Do you need those other collaborative partners to come forward? What are some of the biggest needs you need right now to get you to that next step?
Yeah, so we're currently in the process of looking for property for the Worthy Ranch. Obviously, we don't want to be too far outside of Billings because that's where our clients are, but we do want to be outside of the town, a minimum of 10 acres, all of the things that come with that. So if you know somebody that's selling property, or, it doesn't have to be built. We're okay with building from the ground up, but it can have property on it too. It can be renovated. So looking for property, so referrals from property in the Billings, Montana area would be great. And yes, of course, funding. We have survivors now that want to participate in our piloting program, that want to participate in equine therapy. We have survivors that want to come to our retreat. And so sponsoring the retreat will allows you to be able to send survivors through our program. So funding opportunities, absolutely. If you know grants that serve survivors, refer them to us. That also would be helpful. And we do have volunteer opportunities. We are, creating events and things like that where we can utilize volunteers to help advocate for the Worthy Ranch, to set up things like that. So we do have some volunteer opportunities, very limited. I will say this, though, that volunteers do have to go through a vetting process. They do have to be background checked, regardless of what position they're in. So just be prepared for that if you're interested in volunteering. And then I would say educate yourselves on the organizations that you want to support. Do your homework and researching them, and educate yourself, and constantly educate yourself on what human trafficking is, what it may look like in your area where you live. I often refer people to On Watch, which is Safe House Projects training. It's a simple video program, but all of our board members and volunteers go through On Watch and they get a certificate. But it is an introductory program that will show you really the basic human trafficking, what it looks like today. So, it's important, I think, that people continue to educate themselves and to help out with the cause, not just the Worthy Ranch.
Right. And I agree with you. And you've kind of answered my last question for you. But if there's anything else you want to add to that, on this show, we always tell our listeners ways that they can help combat human trafficking right in their own communities. What are 2 to 3 simple yet key actions people can take this week in their lives or in their communities to combat human trafficking or help survivors?
Yeah, so I know, like I mentioned, On Watch is open to anybody that wants to participate in that program. So we can share the link to the On Watch program. It's through Safe House Project, which is an amazing organization that helps organizations like the Worthy Ranch get started. They build safe houses, they support safe houses, but they also support the advocacy of survivors. So I would say On Watch is one way they can learn more about human trafficking. The second is to educate themselves and do the research before they decide to support an organization. There's so much information out there that we have access to, but do your best to go to a credible source. I think task force are a great way. So you probably have a local task force in your community. Go to them, because usually they're supported by the government, the agencies, and they have reputable collaborations and partnerships. So go to them to educate yourselves, attend a meeting. They're always open to the public. And, Yeah, I would say those two things. Stay curious too. Just stay curious, like, and listen to your gut. Like, if you don't think something is right, or you know what I'm saying, that you see something, say something, right? Penny, you have the hotline number for people that may be a witness to someone that's being trafficked or see something that doesn't look right to them. You know, don't just let it go. Don't just pretend like you didn't see that. You know, there's a reason why you saw that. There's a reason why you got that little gut feeling, that little pinch in your side. And so I'm not saying intervene in any situation at all. That is never safe, but say something, report it, call the number, talk to somebody about it. Because there are so many times that human trafficking could have been prevented or intervened if someone had said something.
Yeah, exactly. We always say it's better to make the call and be wrong.
Yes.
We would love for you to make a call and be wrong.
Yes, 100%.
Oftentimes when people are making that call, they're right. That their gut instinct, the hair on the back of their neck standing up, oftentimes they're right. And people tend to not want to make a call because they think they're going to look stupid or be rejected or something like that. Boy, if that's the least that happens there, walk away from it. You're fine. It would be so much better if you made the call and you were wrong. But make the call, no matter what. Make that call if you think that there's something suspicious. And we do in this podcast, we give out all the numbers for people to call. But Heather, you have provided us with so much great information today, and
Thank you.
we are so excited about the work that you're doing. And obviously, we want the Worthy Ranch, like now, but we also know that you're doing it in the right way, and that right property will come about, and someone's going to hear you speak, may hear the podcast, whatever. However that happens, we know that the right timing is going to happen for that, and the right people are going to come alongside. And we're excited about it and excited to have you and Chris and your family here. Chris is your husband. So we're excited to have you all here in Montana with us, and excited for what you're bringing to our state, and know that you are open to survivors that will be coming in from all over, and excited for the work that you're doing. So thank you, Heather Estes, for your voice, for being our guest today, and for the important work that you're doing.
Thank you.
To learn more about the Worthy Ranch or the Worthiness Formula, please visit Heather's website at theworthyranch.com. We will also have links to topics discussed today on our task force website at yhttf.org. To all of our listeners, thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing this journey with us. If you suspect labor or sex trafficking in the state of Montana, please call 833-406-7867. If you are being trafficked and need help, please call 911. If you suspect labor or sex trafficking outside of the state of Montana, please call your regional FBI office. You may also call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888.